Sorry, you revoked my overtime privileges yesterday. This was several years ago when I worked at a /redacted big name /coffee shop. My shift was 5 a.m. to 1:30 p.m., and often around 1 p.m. giant groups of kids on school field trips would come through the area. This was a coffee shop located in a major CA city, very close to a bunch of museums. I had been working a lot of overtime because of it. To help my co-workers through the rush, I got written up by my supervisor for doing too many overtime shifts without approval. I was explicitly informed to not work overtime again. I had lost overtime privileges until corporate deemed I could have them again, and working overtime again prior to that would result in further disciplinary action. The day after I was written up, right as my shift ended, 3 big buses full of kids unloaded and filled the shop. At 1:30 p.m. on the dot my watch alarm went off and I went to go clock out. The store manager who wrote me up the day prior said, "Wait, where are you going?" I reminded her that I'd lost my overtime privileges, clocked out, retrieved the shift drink I'd made for myself right before the rush, and left. The next day I was informed my overtime privileges had been reinstated. Edits. Whoa, this took off in a way I didn't expect. This was almost a decade ago, when I was in my early 20s and an eager-to-please employee, so I didn't demand they take the write-up off my record, unfortunately. My co-workers all knew about the write-up and were pissed about it too, so none of them were mad when I spite left to prove a point. I worked the super morning shift by choice because I used to be a morning person, because the field trips were super sporadic and there was no way to predict them without knowing the field trip schedules of the entire region. Our manager had somehow managed to avoid ever experiencing one since she typically left around noon. Once she saw what they were like and started believing us, they scheduled one of the afternoon shift people to come in an hour early so we had better overlap.
Now to the comments. Ah yes, the joys of incompetent management. Good job teaching them a lesson.
Somehow, it's always the corporate. Big businesses pay you like shit, but middle management is actually the cesspit of crap in such places. Imagine getting a big head just because you manage a coffee shop. Edited. Not everyone in middle management is a dick. My comment was specifically about people like OPS manager who get a big head because they manage a coffee shop.
Imagine getting a big head just because you manage a coffee shop, a quote for the ages and one that should unironically be printed on coffee mugs. It was only the right thing to do after they wrote you up like that without even studying why you had to go on overtime.
This right here. In a myriad of situations my bosses or colleagues, both former and a few current, catastrophically fail to see why things get done in certain manners, ways, or time frames, yet they want to micromanage or fix a situation but make everything worse, especially for the client or customer, let alone for people that work in that section or area. It really burns me up when they then make it seem like it's your fault when they force their hand with said bad/stupid results after the fact.
I did something similar once, except I was the general manager and I was told by my superiors I couldn't use OT for my employees. I had just taken over a seriously in the red store that was understaffed. This was the 3rd time I was flipping a store for the company. I knew how it was done, so I agreed I wouldn't use the OT. Instead, I used a clause that whenever a GM takes over a new store, they can retrain their employees. I got an email agreeing to retraining for my location, and oh look, 20 hours of training for each employee, on top of their regular hours. Could this be overtime? No, it's training. I had a lot of retraining for the first month, and a lot of happy delivery drivers.
And after that grace period ended?
I had enough employees to fill all the hours, so everyone was happy. My labor cost went to 19% of revenue, with an average of 1.2% variance. The long story is that I was a store fixer. I'd go in and fix everything, hire and train a new GM, and move on. So, I took over the store that was at like 40% staffed. The day before I took it over, one of the drivers literally died. It was rough. The employees and I had a meeting, where I explained the situation and asked for people to volunteer to work OT, and that it would only be until we got staffed, so about a month, which was rough, but I was working 20 hours OT on salary, so it wasn't just them. And they were happy to do it. They saw it as us fixing the store. It made it their store as much as mine. And if a shift couldn't be filled, oh well, I guess we don't have delivery. Come pick it up for 50% off. They promised me a month of hard work. It took me 2 weeks, thank God for the stack of applications and perfect paperwork. And for the rest of the year that I had that store, no one worked overtime unless there was a serious emergency. And every single day the store bought everyone lunch and dinner because I'm not a monster. That had to feel so good. Well done. Who do you think you are? Helping out co-workers and doing more work than you should. Your manager probably.
Usually more. How dare you cost us time and a half, in my experience.
I worked briefly for Walmart, who had a no overtime policy. They would typically work me about 9.5 hours per shift, so I would come in on Friday, work for about an hour and a half and then click out and go home for the weekend. My department manager used to look at me like I was doing something wrong. Nope, just following your company's rules. Sorry, the store is all yours now. My employer gave me a 30% increase of hours for Christmas and I had 2 permanent employees quit. I managed to hit 35% HR increase with 300% sales increase. They docked my pay. So, I started looking for another job.
How is that even legal? WTF. Glad you got away.
Really? Did you conveniently forget our conversation yesterday now that you need me? Have fun not paying me overtime.
They didn't forget, they expected OP would do the work without pay. OP called their bluff.
No, upper management probably said no more overtime and store management had their hands tied. If they let them get overtime, store management would get in trouble. If they can show upper management that there's not enough staff to operate the store properly, they can then get overtime back for employees. This post illustrates how the corporate processes works. It's inflexible and set by people who have almost no idea about the day-to-day operations of the individual store. The correct response would have been to sit and finish your drink as slow as possible inside the store watching the shitstorm go down.
OP replied. A tempting idea, but there were like 3 dozen high schoolers in the store I needed to get out.
Wanna know the best thing about high schoolers? Looks around in Matthew McConaughey. I don't work off the clock. I don't talk about work off the clock. When I'm clocked out, I leave. Good for you. I've shown my supervisor I'm my boss. I'll do what I'm asked to do but not a dang thing more. You were supposed to clock out and still work, like a doormat of easily abused employee. Good job not doing that.
Not in my house. If you're punched out, get off the floor. Otherwise, you're a liability, and if you get injured, try explaining to workmen's comp how they should cover wages for an injury sustained while not on the job. I keep telling my staff to not even punch out until their pocket/bag checks are done.
Yeah, those bag checks are done for the employer's benefit, they must be paid. Chuckles, well that didn't take long. Well handled OP. Why are 95% of workplaces exactly like this?
I do consulting, and part of my service is to write policy and instruction manuals. 40 to 90 pages worth. Even then I'll not be able to write down every contingency that can happen. These are legal documents and can be used in court for whatever problems that may occur. If a non-policy incident happens, legal review must go forward. Lots of money and time. Small businesses can't afford these processes, so they have to be strict about following annoying policies. You would think simple sense things don't need to be put in a manual, but you cannot underestimate how stupid people are. I had to put a no potted plants on the ground that isn't visible to staff policy because some ducking kid thought the rocks in the pot were candy.